Hi, this is updated guidance on legal research. You will be aware that the SRA have recently updated their sample question for legal research, and the answer format that they're now showing is different to earlier examples. Now, the updated legal research sample answer is going to apply for exams from July 2024. So it's really important that you go to their website and have a look at the sample answer that now appears for legal research. You'll find the link to that on your PSP in the resources page and attached to the written guidance that attaches this video. What I suggest is that you go to that, open up the sample answer for legal research and look at it as I go through this video. For IP reasons, we're not able to share that version on this recording, but I'm going to go through it in detail. So pause, go and open the link and get ready to follow my recommendations as we go through that sample. I think what it's important to say is that the SRA may have changed the format of legal research, but there are certain things that haven't changed. So the assessment criteria for legal research has not changed. You are still required in the skill to demonstrate a client focus answer, to identify the relevant sources and authorities, and to use clear, precise, concise and acceptable language in producing your answer. In relation to the law, you have to be legally correct and legally comprehensive. And if there are any professional conduct issues, then you have to identify those in your answer. So the assessment criteria hasn't changed, but the way that you'll display your answer has been slightly modified. So if you now have the link to the SRA sample question on legal research, it'd be a good time to open it and we can go through that in some detail here. I think the first thing to mention is that the sample answer now appears in a template format of an email reply. So you no longer, when you do your answer, have to divide it into part 1 and part 2. You need to use the template that's supplied by the SRA for your answer, and if they supplied you with an email template, which they have in the sample legal research format, then that's the template that you should use. And you'll see from the template that they have incorporated the factual explanation, which is client focus, with also setting out the authorities that they're relying on, and they've not separated them into 2 parts. So for you, from July 2024, it's perfectly acceptable for you to incorporate your explanations about your answer for legal research with reference to the authorities that you're using to support your answer. So if we look at in detail at the sample answer, you'll see that there's a bit of an introduction about the key facts, why they're being asked to do this report. And then they say, I've researched whether Keith is criminally liable, and it sets out their conclusion on that topic. Now, the first thing I want to draw your attention to is the fact that when they deal with the primary legislation, so you're still using primary legislation, which is your statutes, your case law, your procedural rules, regulations, and but what you're going to do is use them in a different format. So when they refer to the offence, so Dangerous Dog Act 1991, and they are referring to section 3 subsection 1 where the offence is committed, and normally in your part 2 where you're setting out your source, your prove it section for your advice, you would have cut and pasted section 3.1 from the Dangerous Dogs Act into part 2. Now here you'll see in the SRA example, they've cited the act, they've cited the subsection, but they haven't cut and pasted in the whole of section 3 subsection 1. What they've done is told their client in a client focused way what that section does. So they go on to say it provides that it's an offence to have a dog dangerously out of control in any place, whether in public or whether a public place or not. So you've got to cite the legislation still, Dangerous Dog Act, Section 3, subsection 1, but what they're now looking for you to do is, in a client-focused way, just tell the client what that section actually means. You'll see that they have gone on, if you scroll down in the sample answer, they've dealt with Section 10, and again, when they've dealt with Section 10 of the Dangerous Dog Act, they haven't cut and pasted the whole of Section 10 into their answer. They've said dangerously out of control is defined by Section 10 of the Dangerous Dog Act and covers the situation where and it goes into it, the explanation. So again, they're requiring you to cite the legislation and then to explain it to the client in a client-focused way without incorporating, just cutting and pasting the whole of Section 10 into the answer. So that's slightly different to the way that you've been doing it before, but in your analysis, when you've been looking at your legal research and you've been working out whether it's an appropriate answer, these are things that you've been doing mentally, and what you're going to do is simply now put your ordinary explanation of what Section 10 does, what does Section 3 do, into your answer, rather than just cutting and pasting the whole of that section into your answer. So in terms of the legislation, you can see that they're happy for you to use abbreviations. So it's the Dangerous Dog Act 1991, and then they've put in brackets DDA. And as they've gone through their report, they have used DDA for the Dangerous Dogs Act rather than you having to type it out in full every time you refer to that. So that's a good tip for you to start to use when you're doing your answers, and it will save time typing the full name of any statute. So they've only used abbreviations for the statute, they haven't used abbreviations for the cases, so I would still type out the name of a case if you're going to use a case with a proper citation. So moving on to case law, you'll see that in the sample answer there's an example of how to use case law where you're quoting from a judgment. So in the case of Rafiq and Folks, 1997, they quote from the judgment of Lord Justice Alt, and you'll see that his words appear in a quotation mark. And that's a tip that you can use if you find that you've been given a case and there's a relevant part of the judgment that explains something that's important to your answer. You can quote from the judgment itself. In terms of the case law, you'll see that the case is set out with the full name of the case, the year, and the reference, which should be included. In the case of a case that's been taken from Blackstone's criminal practice in this particular example, you'll see that they set out the full reference for the case, and then in the case of Blake and the CPS 2017, they include a term in brackets as cited in Blackstone's criminal practice. So if you're not provided with a full case summary, but the case has been cited from a secondary source, in this case Blackstone's criminal practice, you can state as cited in and put in the source that you got the case from. Now, we didn't do that in the past, but if they're using it in the SRA sample answer, it's perfectly acceptable for you to use it in the assessment. So let's say that it wasn't Blackstone's criminal practice, it was Jordan's criminal practice. You would just put as cited in Jordan's criminal practice, and they would know that you'd got it from the sources they provided. So you've seen how they've used the primary statutes, you've seen how they've used case law in the sample answer, and you'll see that in the sample answer they incorporate their explanations with reference to the authority that they're using to justify their explanations. They're applying the facts that they've been given, both in the introduction. As you work your way through the answer, you'll see that they're pulling in those facts again that are relevant to helping them explain the answer that they're giving to the client. And at the end of this case, because it's appropriate, they've given a clear conclusion as to whether or not they think the client has committed an offence, and it's very straightforward. So hopefully, looking at the sample answer, you should come away with a view about how you're going to do your legal research, and you'll have an opportunity to practice this in the mocks. So let's just recap. First of all, you've got to use the template that they supply you, and if it's an email template, then that's what you use. You don't have to organise your answer into a part 1 and a part 2. It is now incorporated into your answer, which is the email reply, but that still allows you to use subheadings, and we definitely recommend you should use subheadings because it helps you to put in a structure to your answer. It will make it easy for the assessor to see that you've dealt with all of the relevant issues, and in our opinion, it just helps to point out that you have used a very logical structure. So just as you do for other written exams, you're going to still use your subheadings to demonstrate your answer as you go through your email response. You can see from the sample answer that you still have to cite primary sources as authority for the advice that you're giving your client. So that has not changed. But in terms of citing the primary sources, you need to cite the legislation, the relevant subsection, but what they're looking for now is for you to explain in a more client-focused way what a particular section does, rather than cutting and pasting in the full extract of that particular section of legislation. And again, it's the same with case law. What's the relevance of that case law? Explain it in a client-focused way, and you're able to cite from a judgment if it's relevant, just a small section within quotation marks, and if it's from a secondary source such as Blackstone's, you can now refer to it as cited from Blackstone's criminal practice, or whichever the sources that they've given you. Now the new format I think gives you more freedom and flexibility to answer the question in a way that I think will allow you to give the same answer, but certainly because you're not cutting and pasting in all of the relevant part of your part 2 authorities, should mean that you're able to complete this task in a quicker time. You'll see that the sample answer is not excessively long. It gets the point, it incorporates the law, and it applies the facts to the law, which is what you're going to do and what you've been doing as you've done your legal research in the past. So some things have not changed. So the way that you look through your resources, the way that you work out your answer is not going to change. The assessment criteria has not changed. Your format is now slightly different and more flexible, and it allows you to focus on answering the question in a very client-focused way. So hopefully you'll find this short video helpful. If you have any questions, then pop along to one of our strategy sessions where we're happy to answer questions on legal research skill. And if you've got any other questions, then pop them into the legal inquiry line and we're happy to answer any law questions on legal research.